Welcome to JJ the Wedding Planner Podcast, the podcast for all the lovebirds who are young or young at heart, the non-traditionalists who might like some traditions, los que hablan español e inglés, or maybe more like Spanglish, where the one rule is that we are exclusively inclusive. I'm JJ, and after almost 8 years in the wedding industry, serving couples of all backgrounds, I realized that there wasn't a central place where I can send them to hear from all the amazing POC professionals that I had met. So, aquí estamos para servirles. After each episode, you will walk away feeling empowered to take on the bits of planning that lead up to your big day, while keeping la tía lovingly off your back. Bienvenidos! Welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of this podcast. I am so stoked for today's episode. We have a guest today, our first guest of the season, and I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation that we had. Our guest is just a fabulous person who is all about giving information, giving content, and talking about money. Y'all know that on this episode and on this podcast, we talk about money all the time, right? We talk about creating budgets. We talk about how to save. We talk about talking about money, basically, right? And today, you're going to hear from a legit finance person. So before we get started in her interview, I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about her. Rita Soledad Fernandez Paulino is a former math teacher turned personal finance enthusiast. While sick on medical leave in March of 2019, she started to develop her financial literacy by reading books, listening to podcasts, and watching YouTube videos. By May of 2019, she became the chief financial officer for a small startup called the Puro Party Paulinos, aka her family of 4. Within 19 months of her new role, Soledad used zero-based budgeting, which we'll talk about someday, to pay off about $23,000 in student loan debt. They saved a 6-month emergency fund, maxed out IRAs for her husband and herself, maxed out her husband's 401k account, and created an early retirement plan. She has since started studying to become a certified financial planner to ensure that more BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, people of color, and LGBTQ gente can receive financial planning from someone who understands their challenges and dreams. Soledad is committed to talking dinero with anyone willing to listen so that we can all build wealth juntos. And I can 100% back that up. She talks about dinero all the time, all day long, on Instagram, and basically anywhere she can talk about it. Today, she's here with us, and we are going to really get into this conversation about money mindset, about just conversations to have with your partner, regardless of if you're already in the planning process, or maybe you're not planning just yet, or because of, hashtag COVID, you've had to take a big pause in planning. These are all conversations that are so important to have. And it's important for our community, for our comunidad, to just have these conversations in the open and not feel the stigma or like the shame of talking about money. Let's just stop that mentality. Anyway, let's get started with today's interview. And without further ado, here we go. All right. Welcome, Soledad, to the podcast. My voice just cracked, but I am so excited that you are here this morning. Thank you for being up early with me and being here and talking dinero.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Yay! I'm so excited. I've been following you, obviously, as you know, on Instagram for a while now, and I've been taking a lot of your tips and things that you're talking about, and I've got your little journal that I printed out, and I'm so excited to just share this with the community and just talk about money. But before we get there, tell me a little bit about yourself. I know the listeners just heard a little bit of a bio intro, but I want to hear from you. Who are you? Why did you get into this whole world of finance? And why do you want to share it? I think that's a big thing. Why are you not just hoarding this information for yourself? And why do you want to share it with people?
I am Rita Soledad Fernandez Paulino, but you can call me Soledad. I am a former teacher, a mother of 2, a wife of 1.
That's good to know.
And I got into personal finance because when I was sick on bed rest, I was really, really sick. I was on disability. I was on medical leave from being a middle school math teacher. I started to read personal finance books. And I decided at that time I was going to be debt-free before 33. And so I pursued debt freedom and organizing my finances and learning about building wealth while sick. And when I reached my goal, I thought like, oh, wow, like no one ever taught me how to do this. Everyone always made it seem like it's okay to just live with debt. Everyone, and I'm not saying like it's not, definitely. I think it's normal that we sometimes we take on debt in order to build wealth, right? So that happens.
Yeah.
But I started to learn just like all this personal finance information that made wealth seem accessible for somebody like me and my husband. I was raised by a single mom. I grew up in Echo Park during a time before the gentrification. Yeah. And there was a lot of gun violence and poverty in the neighborhood. My husband grew up in the South Bronx in the projects. And so we didn't really feel that wealth was something accessible or attainable for us. And then it seemed like as I read these books, it was like a blueprint. And it was like, just follow these little steps and poco a poco, you too can build wealth. And so as I found this like blueprint, I was like, oh, everybody, let's do this. Let's build wealth collectively. And nobody wanted to talk money because in our society, it's still, money is very taboo. So I went online and I was searching for strangers online who would talk dinero with me. And I wanted like that accountability and that support through my own journey. And I also wanted to know like, okay, I'm not a weirdo, right? And so I did find my community. And I love that I have like this growing community on Wealth Para Todos and that I can share what I learned. Other people are sharing what they learn. Like my Instagram, I only follow personal finance people. And when I feel like talking dinero, I just log in and I'll answer questions. I comment, I read, and it's changed my life so much that now I'm pursuing, certified financial planner. I'm pursuing that as a career and actually going into like personal finance as a career.
That's awesome. And I think that's so important to like share with people where this came from, because I think for a lot of us, like you said, who did not grow up hearing this information, grew up either like in poverty, lower class, whatever we call it, like just grew up with the struggle. We don't always see that as attainable. So to see another person who was like, look, this is where I came from and this is where I'm at and this is where I want to go. I think it's so important and it encourages us all to be able to do that. And I know for me, like, I don't think I'll ever become a financial expert, but it's still information that I can take in and I can have my own journey. I think that's what I really want all of our listeners, all of our couples here to hear, that is that no matter where you started, no matter where you are right now, like you can get out of debt and also build generational wealth. Because this is a wedding podcast. We're talking about couples. We're talking about people starting lifelong journeys with each other. And so that's what I want to get into next, is talking about money. We don't have the skills for most of us, right? Like parents are like, de eso no se habla, don't ask. Like, money doesn't grow on trees. All we ever hear is like negativity about money or don't talk about it at all. And then we're here where we're wanting to start a life with our partner. What would you suggest are some of those early money conversations that we can be having, maybe even before we're engaged, like when we're just with a person and we're like, you know what, I think I want to be with this person forever. What are some of those like early conversations that we can just have?
For sure. And it's so important that you talk about money, because money is going to be something that impacts your relationship over time. I would say one of the first things that I always talked about was my credit score. And learning about like your credit score is like a good little, like a little conversation. Cause it's like, okay, how old are you when you got your first credit card? Where did you get it from? How did you learn how to use it? Did you keep your utilization rate low? And just getting into that, like, just like, what was your first like story or experience with a credit card. And most people are going to say, I didn't know how to use a credit card. I didn't know that I'm supposed to use less than 30%. And just because I have a credit limit of $5,000 doesn't mean I should, use more than,
Yep.
1,500, just having those conversations and saying like, oh, what was your first credit card for? Was it a department store credit card? Was it one that you got at bank? Was it one that you got at college? Because at colleges, they're like passing them out like candy.
They know they can get you there.
Right. And so just starting to talk about it, and then we're like, oh, do you monitor your credit score? Do you have Credit Karma? And just seeing what kind of habits they already have in regards to their credit. Right. And so, and also understanding like, your credit score is not like a measure of your net worth. It's not a measure of like your ability to build wealth. Yeah. It's just how you have managed debt so far.
Oh, I like that distinction.
So just, that's like a good little, I think, intro to having it, to starting the conversation. And then I would say, once you start talking, and like I said, it's most likely that both people will have had a time where they just didn't know about how interest rates worked and how everything worked around credit cards. So now they may have some consumer debt. So then you start talking about like, well, what other debt do you have? Is it just all credit cards? Is it another great question is like, how did you get your first car? Did your parents buy it for you? Was it a hand-me-down from like a relative? Did you take out an auto loan? Asking the questions and like that are related to like big debt, like big purchases, right? Yeah. So were you a scholarship kid for college? Did you take out student loans? What type of loans did you get? Were they private loans or federal loans? Anything big, or like, do you own property? Do your parents own property? How did they get the down payment for their first home? Did you grow up in an apartment? Like these are all questions where you can talk, and it doesn't really feel like it's about money at first, because it's really just about like your experiences, and also asking like, what were your parents' conversations around money? Yeah. Because a lot of times, our first financial habits were not chosen. They weren't deliberate on our part. They were imitated. We just copied them from our parents.
I love that. And I think that's important to remember, is like to have these conversations where it doesn't feel like we're going to have this sit down important conversation, because that could really scare a lot of people and make people shut down, right? Like you said, because we didn't have this growing up, and because we're imitating what we saw, many people just shut down and don't even want to have a conversation when they feel like it's going to go there. But I think that's
a red flag.
Yes. Okay. So let's go there. When we talked the first time, we talked a little bit about red flags and about what to look for. So let's say we're trying to have these conversations with our partner, and we are bringing it up, fairly comfortably, not like what is, not going in on people, but just having conversations. What are some red flags on things that either people say or like habits? You mentioned the word habits. What are some of those things that are important for us to just notice about people, especially our partners?
I think it's so important to acknowledge like personal finance is personal. Yeah. What I consider to be red flags for a partner I want to build my life with may not be a red flag for some of the listeners. So I think more importantly, instead of like listening or like sharing my personal red flags, I would want everyone to learn to like tap into their own body and notice that when you're having a conversation about money and your heart starts to like beat a little faster, you feel a tightness in your chest, you feel a warmth go through your body, that tells you that you're hearing something that doesn't feel right for you. And notice those moments. I will share, like for me, I think a lot of times, like when you go on a date for the first time, who pays for the bill? Some people are going to want to be the ones who pay for it. Some people want the partner to pay for it. Some are going to want to go 50%. And it doesn't matter. Ultimately, it doesn't matter, because it's personal finance. It's personal. It's whatever works for you. However, if you're somebody who wants to be the one paying for the meal and the other person also wants to be paying for the meal, does it make you feel uncomfortable in your body? Does it make you tighten up? Or are you able to have a conversation about it and it just flow? Because I think that also tells you in terms of how comfortable you feel having a conversation and showing up as yourself with this person. So the biggest red flags are, when do you feel that you have to stay quiet to avoid conflict?
Oh my God, yeah.
Versus when you get to speak your truth. That's the biggest red flag. And that's like true, like in any kind of relationship. But notice that, because those are the things that will help you kind of see like, okay, well, there might just be a difference here with money, but if we can communicate it, if we can compromise, then it's okay. Ultimately, everything is okay with communication and compromise.
Yes. I love that. And you're right. I mean, there's different styles. Personal finance is personal. I love that. I definitely want people to write that down, take that in, let it sink into your soul, because it's so true. And it's not necessarily a negative if you both want to pay or neither one of you want to pay, right? Like it just depends. And it's not about like gender norms or stereotypes or any of that. It's about like, who are you? Who do you want to show up as to this person? Is this person trying to help care for you in this moment? Are they trying to do something sweet, and I think just remembering to have the communication. I love that, because regardless of our past, regardless of where we are with our finances, just talking about it is important. I know that's a big thing. For me personally, my fiance and I, we've talked about that, because in both of our households, it was the same thing where we just didn't talk about money. And when we really early on, when I knew nothing about finance, and he's a little older than me, so he's had some experience. I remember he told me really early on, he's going to laugh when he hears this. He's like, I'll propose to you when you have a 900 credit score. And I was like, okay. In my head, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna work on my credit. And then come to realize there's no such thing. I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing. And, but just talking about it, and even just saying like, okay, how are you doing on this? How are you doing on that? And just being open from the beginning for us has been really helpful. And we have been on two different finance places because of our age differences, just different stages in life. But talking about it and saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Has been helpful for us to come together in now moving forward with our finances together and living together and all of that stuff. So I think we can make this a fun topic. Most people think money and finance and they think that's not fun. Budgets aren't fun, but we can make it enjoyable.
Yeah. And I think like talking about your early money memories with each other, whatever those were, and seeing like how open is a person, how comfortable are you hearing your partner say like whatever their story was, whether it was that they grew up low income, whether they grew up with a lot of money, whether they never had to struggle financially, where they always knew things were met, like, and noticing within your body, what is your natural reactions? Is there a sense of like pride, empathy, jealousy? Notice your own feelings so that you also think, okay, well, what is it that I have to work on? Yes. Because a lot of times, partners can trigger different memories and emotions in ourselves. And so noticing, when you're talking about money memories with your partner and noticing how you feel, how you're able to show up, can also let you know on like things that you need to work on in your own like life, and things that you need to unpack and heal from in terms of money. I know personally for me, I remember when my husband and I first started talking about money, he was so open. He was so comfortable. And this is like after we were married. When we were dating, it was just so simple. There was a lot of trust. But after we were married, we already had one kid. We had another kid on the way. And I was like, oh, I started, wanting to track our spending. And I remember any time we would sit to talk about money, my heart would just start to race.
Wow.
And I would just get angry. And it was like weird because it wasn't even anything that he was saying. It was more that I had like all my brain would be flooded with money memories from past relationships too. Right. And so I found myself, my brain was trying to protect me, trying to guard me from like making similar mistakes that I had made in previous relationships.
Yeah.
And at that time, I didn't even know it was for me. Instead, I was like looking at my husband and be like, oh, you do this to me. You make me feel this way, when it wasn't his fault. It wasn't something that really he could change. It had to do with like things I needed to change within myself. And it got to the point that my husband didn't even want to talk money with me anymore. And so then I just kind of took over our finances for a long time. And then my grandfather, my abuelito, he died, and I was really depressed and I didn't want to do anything with money. I was just spending it. That's all I was doing. I was spending it. And my husband had to learn how to pay all the bills, and he was struggling there. And eventually, like, we evolved to a point where we now have like money dates and we talk about our budgets together, and we have conversations. But we went years where it was just something that we avoided because yours truly would get so triggered.
Yes.
And so just notice that. And if you're the person in your relationship who gets like emotionally triggered, like, sorry, boo, you're the one who has to heal.
Yes, please. Yes. Say that again, because you know what? Money trauma is real. And what happened to us in the past isn't always our fault, but as adults, it's our responsibility to heal those things. And you're right. Like, owning up to what part is ours. Because in the end, noticing our partner's spending habits or how they deal with money is one thing, but we can't change them. One thing is like, yeah, they want to do this with us, but we can't change them. We can only change ourselves. And if we are like constantly on them and them and them and them, that should signal something to us. Why are we so concerned with it? Some of it is real concern, of course, but also like, are we trying to be too controlling? Is there something we have to work through from our past that is making us so overbearing that, like you said, our partner then doesn't even want to have this conversation?
And sometimes it's not even the past. Sometimes it's the reality that we live in a world with cis hetero norms.
Yes.
So even if you're not someone who's in a heterosexual relationship, so much of what is modeled in the media and everyone around us is like these gender norms about what male should do, what female should do. So you could be in a gay relationship, but still thinking in terms of these like gender norm roles and thinking, oh, it's the man who provides. Or you might also be like, oh, as a feminist, it's really important that, you know, I pay all my stuff. And so we're impacted by that, like our beliefs about who we are, our identity, the things that we care in terms about like our independence, our worthiness is so tied to money. And so sometimes like people will get very defensive, and it's not just about money that we're talking about. We're talking about our identity. We're talking about how we perceive other people to consider us worthy. And so that's when like the family can get involved, because it's like, oh, well, what is your mom gonna think if I'm not paying for this? Or, you know, and it becomes so much bigger. Like, like I remember my husband for the longest time never wanted me to put the credit card on the table when we were at a restaurant. Like we came to pay the bill. Yeah. And it was like, I was the one with, you know, like the credit cards. I was the one who would calculate the tip. I would do all of the math. And he was like, no, it's weird. So he always wanted to put the credit card, but then he would pass me the check so that I could calculate the tip. And then I would pass it back to him so he could sign it. And it was like a thing because we were so, you know, it was about the societal norms and what we were going to look like to other people. And, you know, my husband's Dominican, he's Black. So then there's also this other stigma of like, as a Black man in the world, what are people going to think about him? And so then it just but then over time, we just got more comfortable about being ourselves, being us as a whole in terms of our relationship, that we were able to quiet the little norms that exist around relationships too.
Yeah. And we try to talk about that a lot here of like, there's so much noise. And a lot of times that noise is our family. One thing is like the outside people, like the people at the restaurant, you know, but but then the family often, whether they know it or not, sometimes we get that pressure from them. Like you said, like, what is your mom going to think if you're paying for this, or she knows you're doing that? And, it's hard because, like, yes, our family plays a big role, especially for those of us who sometimes we're in, multi-generational households where the parents are in the house. But in the end, like, it is about you and your partner, period. In the end, right? Like, it has to be, even if the conversations have to be done in private, like, it has to come down to what is right for the two of you, what feels good for you, what is it, not just like, this norm that we're trying to follow consciously or subconsciously, but what feels right for us. And so I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because, we have to get to that point. And that's why I really wanted to share you and everything you bring, because you are so open about your journey. And I just really pray that our listeners are hearing this and picking it up. And like, yes, it can be awkward. Yes, it can feel uncomfortable, but just start having these conversations and you'll get there. And so what I want to talk about next is, you mentioned money dates. So you have talked about, how you and your husband have come from not wanting to talk about money to him being forced to have to do some of it. And then now getting to the point where you're having money dates. And so let's go into the couples who are now engaged. And so they're like, okay, we're going to for sure get married, whether the wedding's a big wedding or a small wedding, regardless of size. Now we're actually planning a wedding and we're planning a life together. Maybe they're not even living together yet. So like combining finances in some ways, that's a big thing. So how do we start those conversations once we're like more secure, I guess you could say? And also any like first tips that you would give to those couples who are just starting this journey? Like they've had the conversations, but they're not all the way there yet.
Yeah, I think first you have to look at what you want as an individual first. So answering in terms of like, how comfortable are you with a joint account versus an individual account? Mm-hmm. How do you expect to pay for the wedding? Are you expecting your parents to help you? Are you expecting your partner's parents to help you? Mm-hmm. Are you going to pay for it yourself? How do you want to save for it? Are you okay with getting debt? How much debt are you willing to take on? And answering these questions individually. Then thinking like, once you're married, like, how do you expect to get a house down payment? Where do you plan to live? How are you going to pay for the furniture? How quickly do you expect there to be furniture in your house? Are you saving for that ahead of time? Are you willing to take out a credit card? Would you look for 0% financing, but then within a certain time limit want to pay off the debt so you could avoid interest? Really thinking about these questions on your own. Thinking about like, at what point do you want to be a beneficiary on a life insurance plan, on a retirement plan? What age do you want to retire? Like the more you know about yourself and where you want to go financially, how comfortable are you with living with debt? Is it something you want to minimize? Do you want to live in a big house, or would you rather have a smaller house and travel more? Like, what do you want to do with your money? Before, and know that, so that when you have these conversations with your partner, you can start to see like, okay, well, what are the things that are most important to me? What are the things that I'm willing to compromise? What does it mean for me to be able to like retire at a certain age? Do I associate that with a level of success? Is that a life dream? What does it mean that I want to have a 3-bedroom house? Is it because I also want to have children? Do you want to pay for college for your kids? Like there's a lot of things. You know what? I'm going to have to create a resource for your listeners and just like write it out, so that we can have like questions for them to consider in terms of their own like financial journey. So that then they could have those conversations with their partner. And so I would say first, know yourself first, what's important to you, then start talking to your partner about it and understand that there is going to be conflict. that does not mean it's a deal breaker.
Mm-hmm.
That means that you two are human, and you just have to talk about it. Just talk about it. And yes, you're going to feel uncomfortable, and you are going to feel like, oh, how can you have such a different opinion about this? That's also going to happen, and it doesn't go away. It's going to happen forever. I just recently had a big money fight with my husband, and it's like, yes, after becoming debt free, even after like me being work optional, we still have conflict. And at the end of the day, I think it's important. And one of the things that my husband said to me is like, you don't support me. You don't think that I can, you don't think that I could provide for this family. And I was like, what the heck?
Wow.
Like, that is not what this is about. I just think we shouldn't lose that FSA money. Like mine was literally just about like, an FSA thing, but for him, it meant something else.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important that happens when we have conflict. That a lot of the reasons why we have conflict is because what we're talking about is not really what we're feeling about. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, because it goes back to what you said of like identity. It's like double talk almost. Like we're saying one thing, but we're feeling a different thing because it's about our pride. It's about what we believe. It's about our identity, but we're talking about this other thing, and so it's important to look beyond the words.
It's so hard to show up as yourself every day. It is to show up as your whole self and say, this is my identity and this is who I want to be and this is who I care about, especially in front of someone else that you love and who you fear rejection from, right? So a lot of times we're not going to talk about the things that are most important to our identity, the things that we value most right away because we're scared of that rejection. And it's really only after consistently practicing that vulnerability and showing up, being vulnerable in front of your partner and noticing how they can hold space for you and notice how they can comfort you, notice how they can like help you, just like reassure you that they accept you for your like whole self, that these conversations get easier.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
It's work.
Yeah, it's hard. And, I think that's why I really wanted to talk about kind of like the different stages of relationships and money talk in relationships, because it's a process and it's never ending. And that some people will be like, no, I want to know that this is going to end someday, but I'm sorry, it's just not. You have to deal with money for the rest of your life. And it's going to be a different season. Like right now we're talking about as you're starting your relationship, but you also mentioned like having kids, paying for kids' college, retiring. Those are like lifelong things that are going to come up. And as I think the more comfortable we can get with each other, even when we have that conflict where we know that it's going to be resolved, we know that this is like, it's not going to last forever. Eventually we're going to figure out why there was conflict and then we're going to be good, but start practicing that stuff now. Like that's what I in every subject, like we said, in anything with relationships, start talking about it as early as possible with your partner, because then it can snowball into a bigger issue later if it's never brought up. So definitely talking money and having these like safe spaces. And like you said, holding space for each other and having money dates where you can sit down and review expenses or review payments, whatever is coming up. All of those things are just so important.
And I think also it's just like always starting your money dates with your goals, with your dreams.
Yeah.
Because that's the fun stuff to talk about, right? And so listing out like the goals and the dreams, and then it just becomes like a large part becomes like figuring out the numbers so that you can reach those goals. And then also understanding like life happens. You have to be able to be flexible. Unexpected things happen. People get sick. People choose to want to leave a job. Your parents can get sick. There becomes like some outside family responsibilities.
Yeah.
So things will come up. Health issues, I think I said that one, but like health issues was a big thing for my husband and I, which is why I always bring it up.
Yeah.
And you're going to be like, I've never dealt with this before. I never thought about this before. We've never had these conversations. Now it's kind of high stress and we have to make a decision.
Yeah.
And just know like, yeah, it is stressful. Breathe, breathe, slow down, and just focus on like, okay, I'm going to be flexible and resilient during this time.
everything that we have talked about so far has been about more than anything, mindset and like getting our own personal mindset and healing journey started, and then starting to do that with your partner. And I know I've heard you on other podcasts as well, and you talk about parties. So I want to shift a tiny bit from the like the thought process into some of the practical stuff. And I know you've mentioned that you love big parties. And
Huge. We are the puro party Paulinos.
Yes. So I want to get into that a tiny bit when and we don't have to spend too much time here, but when we're talking about like some budget saving tips, or like there's any like, oh, I'd suggest like use this because of cashback or whatever, like any little budget savvy tips that you would suggest when specifically planning a wedding, or it could be any event, right? Because there's like birthday parties, and right now a lot of people are doing like real small weddings and then a bigger reception later. So any of those kind of like practical
I would say like first thing you need to do is decide how much money you're going to spend on the party.
Yes.
Where is that money coming from? Are you saving for it poco a poco in a sinking fund from each paycheck, or are you cash flowing it? Right? Like, are you cash flowing in the sense like,
real quick.
So, let's say you have a party in December, right? And so you say your budget is going to be, for simplicity, we're going to say $1,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your budget's $1,000. You can either choose to save, $100 each month for the next 10 months in a high yield savings account, create a sinking fund, and put that money away little by little so that when it comes to November, when you start buying things for the party, you have the money ready. Or you can say, I'm not going to save up for it. But in December, I know that the difference between my income and my expenses, like I actually have $1,000 left over each month anyways. So I'm just going to use that $1,000 extra income to pay for the party.
Got it. Okay.
And so that's what I mean, like cash flow it like in that month. Instead of it being something you save every little bit. So once you decide on the number that you have for your party, then decide how you're going to fund it. Create a plan for that. From there, start listing out everything that you're going to need for the party, and start thinking, okay, well, how much is this going to cost? And for some people, it might be easier to do it the other way around. Like you say, like, okay, well, I'm going to have the party at this location. So the location's going to cost this. The food is going to be around this. And that's how you decide on your number.
Yes.
However, like, if that's how you're going to create your number, then make sure you're really planning ahead in terms of probably like saving each month and having a sinking fund for it. I try to cash flow my parties. So I try to just use the difference between my income and expenses and whatever extra cash I have. I do that way, but I didn't always do that. I mean, when I first started doing my parties, oh my goodness. I wasn't planning at all in terms of the financial situation.
There was no budget.
There was no budget. It was like, oh yeah, sure, $4,000 seems okay. On a 1-year-old's party. So
oh my gosh.
So know that I speak from excuse me, I speak from experience.
And that's so good to hear, because like I mean, and again, slightly going back to the mindset piece, is like so much of it is family, right? We want to have our family around us, and we also usually feel like our family expects this from us. They expect a big birthday party. Like, I don't know, but us Latinos, like we just love being with each other, and we love having lots of food and lots of drinks. And even for a 1-year-old party, it's like there's a full bar, and it's just this expected thing, and like it happens. And so it's not that big parties are bad at all. I'm all for big parties, especially as a wedding planner. But, it's also about like, where's that coming from? Is it coming from the guilt of the family, or is it coming from something you want? That's okay if that's what you want. That's a good thing. And then do it, but find ways to do it.
And I also think there's going to be conflict in terms, like, I know my husband and I, like, he started to embrace some of my party ways, but in the very beginning, he was like, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous, Soledad. I don't understand it. And yet I definitely had the family that was like, oh, and you're going to have beer, right? And you're going to have, carne asada, right? And you're going to have this and this. And so I definitely felt like the pressure more to deliver and having like a huge party. And then over time, I've learned, ways to still have my party and still stay within budget so that we could meet our other financial goals, right? Like throughout my debt-free journey, I always saved money for my parties because that was something that was really important to me. And I think knowing your values, knowing about the things that like so important, like non-negotiable things that you do not want to give up, makes budgeting sustainable for you. And so the same thing with a party, right? Knowing what are the most important things that you want to have for the party and then planning around there. And so then maybe, you're like, oh, it's really important for me to have flowers, like a certain type of flowers. Okay. So that's really important. Then start with the budget there in terms of how much money you're going to spend on the flowers, and then look for cheaper options when it comes to drinks or the DJ. Or the invites, like you find your things depending on what's most important to you. For a long time, I cared so much about decorations and I didn't care about food. Honestly, that was truly like my thing. Like I cared about how the pictures were going to look. And then my husband was like, Soledad, that is so crazy. Nobody cares about the decorations except you. And I was like, oh no, I definitely have some tias who will care about the decorations. But over time I was like, oh, I know. I was like, let me focus more on food and things in terms of the guests, and then I'll plan around. And so I learned to get, I'm creative. So I learned to make my decorations, and Pinterest became my best friend so that I could find little, and I would like create decorations from recyclables and just learn like little things like that to save money. But again, it all stems from knowing what your priorities are, what are your non-negotiables, and then letting Google be your best friend.
Grandma Google. And I think that's so important. Like we don't want finance and the idea of budgeting and saving and wealth to be restrictive. Right. We're not doing this to be restrictive. We're doing it to have freedom. And so remembering that when it comes to wedding planning, like focusing on the vendors or the items that are important to you, and then not worrying so much about the other ones. And then the bigger life picture of like, if it's really important for you to have this big wedding, or at your wedding, you want to really spend and indulge in something, like that's okay. That's the point of this, is to make that happen, not to make you feel guilty about that. And so I just really want people to hear that this doesn't have to be restrictive. It doesn't have to be, it might be a little hard, but it doesn't have to be a negative. Like it should be something that you look forward to because it's making other things happen for you.
And I think what happens is that, like, as people start to look at the numbers, sometimes it can feel overwhelming to realize like, oh, what I want costs $3,000 and what I have is $1,000. And then you start to think like, okay, well, what do I really want? And then you're attached to something. And so it's hard. And sometimes you have to, you are going to grieve a little, or you're going to say, you know what, I'm going to pick up a side hustle and I'm going to make up that difference. It depends on what really matters to you. And I like, also like another thing is like, make it open. Like I know my mom, for one party, I was like, I wanted like horchata. We were talking about like the different like drinks that were going to be available. And she wanted soda. And I was like, I don't drink soda. And she's like, just because you don't drink soda doesn't mean no one else will drink soda. I was like, I'm going to have horchata and I'm going to have a margarita machine. And then she's like, oh, well, what about beer? And I was like, I don't drink beer. And then she's like, oh, but what about your uncles? And so it turned into a thing where my mom was like, okay, well then I'll pay for the beer. And I was like, okay. And I was okay with that. But then my husband was like, what? Why is your mom helping with this party? And so it's like, these are like all the little conversations. And I was, and it does. And I'm like, like I had to tell my husband, Bobby, it doesn't really matter. Like it's a family party. If family comes together to contribute, like that's okay. But again, people have all these different beliefs and ideas around that. And so that's where kind of like the conflict comes, but don't personalize it. It's just understanding like, oh, we're different. Is our difference like a big issue, or can it just be something that we're like, oh, we're different. Let's keep it rolling.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's actually, we talked a little bit. I had a whole episode about padrinos and, why it can be really good, but also some things to safeguard and boundaries to create and things like that. But I think that's so important to just talk about, because like you said, like that beer, right? Let's just use that as an example. Like that was not important to you. And so you're like, I'm not going to spend my money on that. If I care more about this, that's where I want to go. But someone else might come in and say, okay, I'll pitch in for that. I'll take care of that. And then we can continue to just collaborate on things and make it enjoyable. And it's a whole family event. And that's okay. Like we can allow people to help us when they want to help us. I do always believe it should be specific. Because if people are like, oh yeah, I'll help you with your wedding, and then they don't ever put a number to it, and you're like, that can get hard. So having those early on conversations, I think are good and really necessary, but just allowing space for others to contribute, I think is so important, especially for big parties and big weddings, right? Like, especially moving forward, like 2021, 2022, everyone wants to party. Everyone's like, we've been locked down. We haven't seen each other. We have been
can't wait until I have
of
my
dancing. I'm like, yesterday we were grabbing dinner and there's music playing up in the restaurant where we're picking up food. And I'm like, I miss dancing. I miss being with people. I miss that. I'm a people person. And I know we are all missing each other. And this is specifically a wedding planning podcast. So all of our couples, all the people listening are planning a wedding, and we will get there. I know many of my people have had to postpone and reschedule, and it's so painful. And you mentioned allowing ourselves to grieve. Yes, please let ourselves allow ourselves and yourselves to grieve, because things change. And there are people, so many people who have lost jobs and now don't have the same finances that they thought they were going to have for wedding,
or lost loved ones. And now they don't have their presence at the wedding.
It
so
sucks. There's so much that is happening, and we just need to allow ourselves to understand that everyone else gets it. I think one of the only silver linings in any of this is that we're all going through it together. We're all affected by it differently because of our circumstances, but we're all here. It's happening all around us. And we're losing people that we love. And that can be more heartbreaking than losing a job, because you can get a job somewhere else, right? But you can't get that loved one back. And that can change wedding planning. That can change, who's going to walk you down the aisle or who's going to help do this. And so just to let ourselves
feel our emotions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like let yourselves feel your emotions, take your time to heal, and know that does take time. It's not going to be like, oh yeah, okay, I've had a month, or I've had a year, or I've had 2 years. It's a roller coaster. And so just knowing that all of these things take time, like you always say, poco a poco, like
todo
that's
con tiempo.
Todo con tiempo, especially when it comes to this. We have time. This is a lifelong journey that everyone is starting on. I always try to remind listeners of the wedding day is big and it's fun and it's important, but also you're starting a life. You're getting married. You're starting a marriage. Think long term, and starting these money conversations early, being open the whole time, thinking through some of the ways to make it a special experience, but also not do it out of guilt or out of pressure from the outside. Remembering what's important to you and your partner, and just focusing on that, I think is the biggest thing we both want to drive home today.
For sure. You need to have me back.
Yes.
Bring me back so I can talk more dinero with everybody.
Oh my God. We're definitely going to do a part 2, because I wrote down a whole list of questions. I'm like, we can't cover all this in one episode. My podcast producer would be like, this is going to take me a long time to work on. And so I was like, let's do this. Let's try and do this in 2 parts. And so I'm so, so grateful that you have been here this morning, that you spent time with us, that you have given us your wisdom. And so please tell us where we can find you, where can we follow you, what resources can we download, and how can we find you?
So I am mostly on Instagram. That's definitely my favorite way to connect with people, but I'm also on Twitter. I am also on Pinterest at Wealth Para Todos. I have a website, wealthparatodos.com. What else do I have?
Tell us about your download.
Oh, so I have various different downloads. I try to do a different download each month because I have a newsletter that comes out on the 1st and the 15th of each month, which I definitely suggest that you subscribe to that to get a little money insight. I try to share like my own personal journey, give words of encouragement, provide some resources. And each month, my goal is to provide a workshop, which is like a paid thing, but with the newsletter, also a resource that could be handy. So in January, the resource was a money mindset workbook. In February, I provided a spending tracker so that people can track their spending. And each month we'll have something different.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for all that you do and that you give just so openly and freely online, and all of these little resources. I know for me, it's what helps me in my journey. I have your money mindset workbook. I'm still working through it. It's from January, but I'm working through it little by little. And it's just been so helpful to me. And so I'm just grateful for everything you do. We will definitely have you back soon. Just talk more dinero and talk about all the things, because it's infinite, right? We just mentioned this is a lifelong journey. There's so much to talk about. So thank you so much for being here today, for being with us. And I'm just feeling really grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. All right. Okay, everybody, go follow Soledad at Wealth Para Todos, and I will add all of her links and everything into the show notes. Thank you so much, Soledad. Okay, friends, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. We can be BFFs on Facebook or Insta at JJ the Wedding Planner. Or if you're actually looking for information on wedding planning or coordination services, you can head over to our website, jjtheweddingplanner.com. And please don't forget to leave us a review on today's episode. Let us know what you thought. Was this helpful? And the more 5-star reviews that we get, the better chance we have at reaching more people with this information. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you soon. Los quiero. Adios.